Hi, and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. It's Science Fiction Saturday again, but I'm kind of loosening the concept. I'm going to be doing a horror movie, and I'm going to be doing an Indiana clone, a fake Indiana Jones movie that came out after Raiders of the Lost Ark. So we're going to do that stuff. Next time around, it'll be straight science fiction again. Let's talk about Italian cult movies. Now, Italian movies are a broad church. Italy did some of the biggest movies of the silent era. They had a little bit of a lapse in the 1940s for fairly obvious reasons, but then they came back in the late 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, hitting really big. I mean, it's such a broad subject. I mean, you can go from Angie Dickinson riding a Lambretta around mountain villages in Jessica. You got Marcello and La Dolce Vita going like this. You've got all those sword and sandal peplum movies. You got your Commedia all'Italiana movies like Dino Risi's Il Sorpasso with Vittorio Gassman and Jean-Louis Trintignant riding a sports car on a summer's day through rural Italy. And then you go to Giallo movies, of course. And then in the 1970s, Italy saw that other countries were doing a lot of horror movies. They've been doing them themselves. And they kind of went hold my beer and gave us movies like Nightmare City and Lucio Fulci's Zombie Flesh Eaters. Tons and tons of really varied movies came out of Italy. I'm not even mentioning the Italian police procedurals we got in the 70s and 80s, which were crazy action films. So all through the history of cinema, Italian films really hit in so many different ways. I was on the AEA Films website a couple of weeks ago and they had a sale on, and I got tempted. I shouldn't have spent the money, I'll be honest with you about that. But I found a couple of Italian movies which were coming out in 4K. And I've got this weird fascination with cult films coming out on 4K. Not your big cult films, the Halloweens and the Nightmare on Elm Streets and all those kind of things, but obscure movies that are getting the 4K treatment and are being put out in prestige editions. I kind of like that. Can't afford half of the ones that I want, but I picked two, got them for like $30 each Australian, which was great for any kind of 4K. And the movies I got are an Indiana clone starring David Warbeck called Ark of the Sun God, and an Italian horror film directed by Marino Girolami, Zombi Holocaust. And both of them each hit in their own way. They're a lot of fun to watch. They're entertaining. And the 4K transfers by 88 Films are fantastic. Love them a lot. And there's some weird aspects to both of them, and I'm going to tell you what they are. Let's start with Ark of the Sun God. This, of course, is an Indiana clone, one of the many movies that came out after the Indiana Jones films, hoping to cash in on the box office that Indiana Jones movies got. Same thing happened with Star Wars films. But you've got to remember, too, to put things in an historical context, that Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark copied other movies. Take a look at The Secret of the Incas, for instance, and you're going to see a lot of the antecedents for Raiders of the Lost Ark in that. I've talked about that on the channel before, but I've got a bit of a fascination with Indiana clones. There's, of course, the Australian one, Sky Pirates, that Umbrella put out on Blu-ray a year or two ago, and there were a lot of them in the early 1980s, and there only seemed to be three kinds of movies being made in the early 1980s. There were Star Wars rip-offs, there were Indiana clones, and there were soft adult films where the supposed heroes turned out to be sex pests. This one's one of the few Indiana clones that stars a New Zealander, David Warbeck, who lived in England for most of his life, but was born in the South Island of New Zealand, went to England in the 1960s, became a model, became an actor, had a kind of okay career and died, unfortunately, early in the late 1990s of cancer. But David Warbeck turned up in all sorts of things. He was in an episode of UFO. I don't know if he was in Space 1999 or not, but he might have been. And he did one of Martin Campbell's first movies, Martin Campbell, who made Casino Royale, the new one, not the old one. One of his first movies, The Sex Thief, starred David Warbeck. And David Warbeck stars in this as a guy called Rick Spear, because they've always got to have a masculine noun as a second name and a kind of casual forename. So Rick Spear is the character played by David Warbeck, who's a cat burglar and a very good one, who gets roped into a plan in Turkey. The movie's Italian, but it was filmed predominantly in Turkey. He gets roped into a plan to find a lost treasure, in this case a scepter, which a weird religious cult needs to show its power and to gain followers and take over the world, because that's all it takes. He's got a beautiful girlfriend and a morally ambiguous friend who's roped him into this job, played by John Steiner, and they are chased by this cult who want him to find this treasure for them. They know that it's behind a golden door somewhere in the mountains, and the golden door has a security system which needs an expert cat burglar to crack, even though it's about 5,000 years old. And the scepter of Gilgamesh is the prize that they're searching for. And if they don't do it right, the temple collapses and they don't get the scepter. It's one of those kind of deals, kind of like the end of Land of the Pharaohs. This one was directed by Antonio Margheriti, who did a lot of different genres.
Margheriti!
And at the start, it's kind of low energy, except for a couple of scenes. There's a nighttime car chase in this movie where they're being chased by this cult in cars through some industrial areas in Istanbul. And they cut from the actors going like this behind the steering wheel to remote control models for the stunt work. They don't use actual cars and actual settings. They use remote control car models to do the car chase. And I love it. I think it's a great idea. It doesn't look real at all, and particularly on 4K, you notice that the dust being thrown up by the cars isn't swirling realistically, and the way one of the cars hits a train and bounces off it basically doesn't quite work the way real physics would in a full-scale car. But I like it. They didn't have the budget to do this thing full bore, so they went down to their local hobby shop, got a bunch of remote control cars, made some pretty good sets, threw a bit of smoke in front of the camera, and just ran with it. I just like the way they improvised on that. They did use a lot of real locations in Turkey, including the big market in Istanbul. You see the Golden Horn behind half of the scenes when they're traveling around Istanbul. There's an interesting chase on a boat, which is done fairly well for the budget. And then they go off to the desert. There's another car chase, which is partly done practically, but also with some car models, because they weren't really going to run a car with a guy in it through an exploding petrol tanker. This one works. And even though David Warbeck wasn't the most charismatic of actors, let's say, he was serviceable. He does okay at this one. And the temple at the end is a marvelous set. They built this large-scale temple set. They've got lava flowing underneath it. Not real lava, of course, because that's very expensive to do. But they've got lava. They've got cracks opening up in the earth. They've got large pillars falling down as the earthquake hits. They've got all that stuff. And it's a really nicely done set. And all credit to them for that. The production design and the set design of this movie really works. Now, this one, I got great value on it. It was $30, as I said, Australian. And I've got a booklet about it. Now, in no scene in this movie does David Warbeck look like that. I'll be honest with you. But you do get the booklet with the pictures. And there's a thing about Antonio Margheriti in the 1980s when he did a lot of blockbusters. You get it on Blu-ray and 4K, which is useful, and both are region-free. Of course, 4Ks are all region-free, but the Blu-ray itself is as well. And I got a poster. Now, this is a pretty good poster because it's on thicker paper than most of these posters are. So you get that one, which I totally love, and you get the Italian one, which is pretty good as well, with the Italian title of the movie. Now, I've got a few 4Ks in the collection, but most of them tend to be very familiar films. Things like I've got Giant on there, I've got The Maltese Falcon, I've got a whole bunch of that kind of stuff in there. But weird Italian obscurities, I kind of like the fact that I've got a few of this kind of film on 4K in the collection. Format doesn't matter to me as much as it does to many other collectors. But I like this presentation, and I can see the virtue of putting it into 4K. It looks really crisp. You can tell that the models in the car chases are models, but that's a plus for me. A lot of people may see it as kind of cheesy and looking a little bit like a Thunderbirds episode, but it worked for me. Even though for an Italian film of its time, and I think this is around 1980 if I'm not mistaken, It doesn't have a lot of nudity. It doesn't have a lot of graphic violence in it. It's got a lot of action. It's got a lot of very interesting sets. But for the most part, it isn't as gory or as prurient, let's say, than a lot of other Italian films of the time. Nonetheless, this one did get a release here in Australia in cinemas. And I definitely know it got a VHS release. I don't know if it ever got a DVD release, but it did get a VHS release because I rented it myself. And it's kind of fun. At the price I paid for it, getting a 4K of an obscure Italian action film is something I don't see I wasted my money on. A lot of fun. You should check it out if you can. I'll post a link to where you can get it from 88 Films. And if you do, you're going to have a good time with it. Then we get on to something a little more gory and a little more sanguine and a little more of those crash zoom shots into a skull covered in maggots. Marino Girolami's Zombi Holocaust from 1980. It stars Ian McCulloch, Alexandra Delicoli, Sherry Buchanan, Peter O'Neill, Donald O'Brien, and you don't know who any of these people are, do you? This one, can I show you the back? No, I can't. I can show you that much of the back because there is a fully unclad woman strapped to a temple underneath my finger. But this one is mad and it's great fun. It's got a lot in common with Lucio Fulci's Zombie Flesh Eaters because it was filmed back to back with that. Like Zombie Flesh Eaters, there are scenes on Zombie Holocaust which were filmed in New York City, mostly street scenes. And I don't think they paid for the use of the streets the way that people do now, in the same way that Larry Cohen didn't when he was filming Hell Up in Harlem. But Zombie Holocaust has a plot that's all over the place. It starts in New York City, where there are corpses in the morgues at hospitals that are losing body parts. In one of them, a guy's hand gets cut off. There are some giblets missing from another corpse, and the police start investigating it. And there's a female doctor, played by Alexandra Delicoli, who we get some intimation is maybe a cannibal. She's also incredibly beautiful, statuesque blonde woman. Brings out unworthy thoughts in me, let's put it that way. They find out that some of the body parts that are missing have been taken by some people who are members of a Moroccan cannibal cult from one of the islands in the Malacca Straits. And so an expedition is sent to these islands to find out what's going on and to work out why there are cannibals. Don't think about it too much, just go along for the ride. So a group of hapless people, along with a boat captain and a few porters, go to this island, but they stop at another island first because there's an engine problem. They've got to stop at an island before the island they were meant to go to. They stop there and start getting attacked by the native cannibals, who are very sneaky and very ruthless. There's a lot of disemboweling in this one. There's a lot of scary stuff. There's a lot of eye gouging, all that kind of stuff that you expect from this level of zombie movie. It kind of cheesed me up because all the people involved, all the people who come to this island are totally hopeless at situational awareness and making sure that they're not going to be attacked. They have one guy on guard at night time, things like that. And they put themselves into situations where it's pretty obvious somebody's going to come in from the edges and grab someone and basically eat their intestines. So for me, I kind of like my protagonist to be a little smarter than that. So you've got an island, you've got a whole bunch of hapless people going there on an expedition, and you've got cannibals. But that's not all, because there's a mad scientist on the island. By the way, the other name for this movie is Dr. Butcher, MD, which may give you an indication about what the movie's about. And this doctor, for reasons known only to himself, has set up a lab on this island, and he's creating zombies. He's doing a lot of important scientific research, like transplanting the brains of human beings into zombies he's had in the fridge for a couple of months. Not the nicest person. He grabs one of the people, he actually grabs two of the people, and starts doing experimentation on them. Meanwhile, the beautiful woman played by Alexandra Delicoli is kidnapped by the cannibals, but she's not killed, and she becomes their high priestess because, surprise, she too is a cannibal. They have a little coronation ritual for her, which involves her being sky-clad, and they paint little flowers and vines over her body, and then put her on a stone altar and have a ceremony for her. There is a little bit of the prurient gaze in this movie. but it's balanced out by skulls covered in maggots and people being disemboweled and very good practical makeup effects, including a guy getting his eyes gouged out. All that stuff that you expect from this kind of Italian zombie movie. Part of it was filmed in Quintana Roo in Mexico. Part of it was filmed in the Dominican Republic. So your location shots are pretty damn good. It all works to sell the concept of there are cannibals on these islands and they're all shit scared of zombies. And rightly so too, because when the zombies scream, it is pretty bloody terrifying. Things end badly for most of the characters, but the movie is really entertaining. You start out in New York City in this mystery of the hospitals, and then you get totally in a different environment altogether. And the mystery in the hospitals doesn't totally get resolved either, which is kind of wild. But plotting isn't the strong suit of this kind of movie. So the inside cover's got that on it. Yeah, I'm not going to look at that picture anymore. And then we get, of course, a little booklet, and we get a poster. So we get that artwork as well, which is pretty kind of cool, and I like it. And lots of more. I can't show you that page. Oh no, I can't show you that page. I can show you that one. So there's a whole bunch of stuff about Girolami, the director, and how the movie was made. There are 2 different essays about the Zombi Holocaust with a whole bunch of different production art in there. And this is running about a 36-page booklet. So it's not just a throwaway booklet. It's got a lot of useful information and some pretty significant essays in it. And there's an essay on the image of women in Zombie Holocaust, which is kind of interesting. Then, of course, you get the posters. And again, like the other 88 Films movies, you get really solid cardstock for the poster. It's not flimsy in any way. And you get that. And you get that. So if you're so inclined, you can have zombie posters on your wall. I think next Halloween, one of the themes I might do for next Halloween, tell me if you'd like me to, is I'll do Italian horror movies on the channel next Halloween. I won't put this one in there, but I can always throw zombie flesh eaters into there. I can throw in a whole bunch of other Italian horror movies because there are a lot of them. Of course, you've got the Mario Bava stuff, which I haven't even touched on. But Italian horror and Italian genre cinema was fascinating in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in particular, and into the 1980s, where they were genre chasing. They did the sword and sandal stuff in the early 60s, along with a bit of horror. In the middle 60s, they started to get into gialli and created that whole subgenre. And in the 70s, you got the police procedurals and more extreme horror, like Lucio Fulci's Zombie Flesh Eaters and Zombie Holocaust and Nightmare City, all of that kind of stuff. Really interesting and extreme horror for its time. People talk about extreme horror these days with the Terrifier movies. But when movies like Nightmare City hit and Zombie Flesh Eaters, they scared the pedestrians. People were really worried about the extremity of the violence in those. Zombie Flesh Eaters, I think it was banned in Queensland, which is a sign of quality in Australia. And a lot of things had cuts made to them. And then, of course, there's The Antichrist, which has just been put out by Imprint. Lots of Italian horror movies that really hit hard. And they had a mise-en-scène that was quite unlike horror movies from other cultures, even though, to a certain extent, the Italian horror movies were trend-chasing. And there were, things like The Antichrist was directly influenced by The Exorcist, and the Zombie Flesh Eaters were directly influenced by Night of the Living Dead and things like that. They put their own twist on it and put their own cultural fears into those movies. But that makes them interesting and a very different experience between watching The Exorcist and watching The Antichrist, or watching Night of the Living Dead and watching Zombie Holocaust. Totally different vibe to them, totally different intentions by the filmmakers. But ultimately, they're all entertaining. And even when Italian cinema did chase the trends that were coming from Hollywood, they never did carbon copies of those particular movies. They always made them their own. I love the fact that I can watch these movies and not even think they're from anywhere else. And sometimes not being able to predict the twists and turns of the plot. because I don't think the filmmakers thought of the twists and turns of the plot until they were making the movies. There are incredibly adept people making these films. So even though these two films can be considered derivative of other films from other places, they're each in their own way unique and each in their own way entertaining in a different way than the movies I was seeking to emulate. And that's very cool. And I'm glad they're getting some respect by having these quality releases put out by 88 Films. So let me know if you've seen these movies or whether you'd like to, and what other Italian zombie movies or Italian horror movies you can recommend. I don't know if there are any more Italian Indiana clones, but that's kind of okay. You don't need to have that many of them. But there are a lot of really good Italian police procedurals from the 1970s and 1980s, which are recommended. The Fernando De Leo movies, for instance, are all brutal, brilliant crime films. And having just talked about these two films, I think I may have to go on a binge of Italian cinema for a little bit. I may not. I may do something else. But right at this moment, I'm kind of inclined to bring out my Fernando De Leo collections and a bunch of other films from the shelves here and just go on a little bit of a mini film festival of Italian genre cinema. So thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. You can donate to the channel through YouTube if you choose to. You can become a channel member, or you can become a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. And each month you get a couple of the videos early. You also get my Spotify music playlist. And the next one's coming up. I'm not doing a Christmas one, but I am doing a whole bunch of Italian and Japanese pop music that I've found. And there's some weird and wonderful stuff in there. So next up on the Monday video, I've got 3 movies I've seen recently in the cinemas I'm going to review. And they're very different, but they're all interesting. And I'm going to review all 3 of those. And then we get into the midweek video. And then we get on to Science Fiction Saturday again. And I promise you some very pew-pew aliens and nasty creatures science fiction for that one. So until all of that happens, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Watch some movies where maggot-covered skulls are revealed by screaming women. And I'll catch you next time.